If you're looking for a detailed breakdown of the Offspring's Pretty Fly for a White Guy, then you're in the right place. In this video, we're going to analyze the song from 4 different angles: song structure, instrumentation, chords and harmony, and genre influences. Within those broader categories, we'll also cover things like the song's meaning, similarity to other songs, and the 6 hooks that make it so catchy. And stick around until the end for today's Song Challenge, a segment where I challenge you to find songs which include a specific musical feature covered in today's video. Alright, let's get into it. Pretty Fly for a White Guy only has 3 structural sections: the verse, chorus, and main hook. On the surface, it looks pretty simple, but there's actually a little bit more going on here than meets the eye. So the first interesting structural feature is that the main hook is deconstructed into 2 parts, or 2 subhooks the first time it occurs. First, we get the call and response hook, "Give it to me, baby. Which is then followed by the guitar riff hook. But for the rest of the song, these 2 hooks combine into one super hook, which I'll call hook AB. Give it to me, baby. Give it to me, baby. But the most interesting thing for me about this song structure is what it does to hold the listener's attention after the second chorus. Most verse chorus style songs use a bridge at this point. A bridge introduces new material that contrasts with the familiar sections and keeps the listener from losing interest. However, this song does not use a bridge. Instead, it holds the listener's attention by subverting their expectations of the order in which the established sections occur. I'll show you what I mean. So first, the song establishes a pattern: hook, verse, chorus, hook, verse, chorus. Subconsciously, our brains detect this pattern and expect its continuation here. So based on what has come before, we should get the hook here, but instead, we get a third verse. This makes the listener sit up and pay attention. There has been an unexpected diversion from the established structural order, but we quickly adjust to where we are, the verse. So now, based on previous verses, we expect the chorus to follow, but we get the hook. Our expectations have been subverted again. So now, there's only one possible section left that could logically follow: the chorus. So surely we can't be tricked a third time, right? Well, we do get the chorus next, but before that, we're throwing one final curveball. Previously, each time we've had the call and response hook, it's been followed by the titular line, "And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy." Now we have the call and response hook again here, so we expect to hear that line, but we don't. Instead, we get the Spanish count-in, which was previously used at the end of the guitar riff hook, or hook B. As you can see, this part of the song keeps throwing us slightly off balance, and every time we think we've found our footing, it takes another unexpected turn. It's a beautifully crafted sequence that manages to keep the listener on their toes without really adding any new material. Finally, we have the last chorus. This chorus is extended through the repetition of a line at the end of the chorus. So in chorus 1, we have the line, "The world needs wannabes."
The world needs wannabes, hey, hey, do that brand new thing.
In chorus 2, we have a slight variation on this line with "The world loves wannabes." Then in the final chorus, we have both of these variations, plus one more. Let's get some more wannabes.
The world needs wannabes, the world loves a wannabes, let's get some more wannabes, hey, hey, do that brand new thing.
I call this technique looping the final line, because we are literally in a momentary loop, going back and repeating the same line several times to delay the end of the song. Another example of looping the final line occurs in "Take Me Home, Country Roads" by John Denver, where the last line of the final chorus occurs 3 times. We can divide the instrumentation into 2 parts. We have the band, comprised of lead vocals, guitar, bass, and drums, Then we have what I'll call additional elements, comprised of guest vocals and Latin percussion. You'll notice that most of these additional elements occur in the hook, while the verse and chorus are just the core band members, with some gang vocals thrown in during the chorus. The exception to this is the third verse, which includes Latin percussion, but we'll get to that later. Now I should quickly clarify what I mean by gang vocals. This is a term commonly used in music production for a type of backing vocal involving several voices, so a gang of voices, yelling the same thing into a microphone. Imagine a rowdy group at a pub singing along to a song, and that's pretty close to what gang vocals sound like. Sometimes they come in for the whole chorus, like in Queen's We Will Rock You, and other times they just chime in on certain words or phrases, which is what we have here with Get It Anyway and Go On Ricky Lake.
You know he really doesn't get it anyway. You know you can always go on Ricky Lake.
Now the song begins with the nonsensical words Gunter, glieben, glauten, globen. This is actually a sample taken from the Def Leppard song Rock of Ages. The phrase came about during the recording sessions for Rock of Ages when the producer decided to count the band in before a take using a made-up language that vaguely resembles German. While it started out as a bit of a joke, it ultimately ended up being included as the intro in the final cut of the song. I'll include a link to Rock of Ages in the description if you want to check it out. As a side note, this is how you'd count in using actual German. Now, Pretty Fly for a white guy's use of the gibberish count-in is fitting for two reasons. First, it establishes the humorous, light-hearted mood of the song and lets the listener know that they shouldn't take this song too seriously. I mean, yes, this song is about a middle-class white boy appropriating elements of black hip-hop culture that he doesn't really understand, but it's not done in a serious, finger-wagging kind of way. It's more like a comical observation of an absurd, but mostly harmless behaviour, similar to the way you might laugh at a cat that thinks it's a dog. This guy is the equivalent of a barking cat. There's no real anger toward the subject. After all, his intentions aren't bad. He's just really enamoured by hip-hop culture to the point where he feels compelled to make it a key part of his identity, even though it's so far removed from his daily existence and life experience, and he only has a very superficial, commercialised understanding of it. The other reason the fake language used in the count-in works so well is because it's the perfect metaphor for the subject of the song. It's not a real language, nobody speaks it. It tries to be German through its adoption of stereotypically German phonological features, but it falls well short of the mark. It's a wannabe language, just like the white boy is a wannabe gangster, hopelessly attempting to mirror the identities of the gangster rappers he sees on MTV by adopting the surface level features of hip-hop culture like clothing, accessories, and choice of music. In both cases, both the wannabe language and wannabe gangster come off as bad caricatures of the real McCoy. Interestingly, the song also features a Spanish count-in, perhaps as a legitimate counterpart to the fake language count-in. The Offspring are no strangers to incorporating other languages into their song lyrics. For example, their album Ixnay on the Hombre incorporates Pig Latin, English, and Spanish into its title. And the follow-up single to Pretty Fly, Why Don't You Get a Job, substitutes the Spanish word dinero for the English word money. Next, we get this nice drum intro that precedes the first hook. The first hook is a call and response between two Latin American sounding female backing singers and the Offspring's lead singer. The female singers seductively beg the wannabe subject to give it to me baby, while the lead singer, presumably in the role of the wannabe subject, replies with a high-pitched, goofy-sounding "aha, aha." It's all a bit ridiculous, but it works within the comedic context of the song. This call and response is sung over the drums and additional Latin percussion in the forms of a güiro and cowbell.
Give it to me, baby. Give it to me, baby.
This section finishes with a deeper male voice taking over the role of our wannabe subject for the line, "And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy." The song then launches into Hook B, the main riff played by the guitar and bass.
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy.
Right at the end of this guitar hook, we get a Spanish counting in a deep male voice.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
As previously mentioned, these two hooks combine into one for the rest of the song. Also notice that the instrumentation is taken up a level in the final hook with the inclusion of several Latin percussion instruments. So in terms of instrumentation, the hook is slightly different each of the 4 times it appears. You'll also notice a slight difference between the 2 times we hear "and all the girlies say I'm pretty fly" for a white guy. The first time around, the deep-voiced male says the whole line, but the second time around, he only says "and all the girlies say I'm pretty fly," with the female vocalist chiming in with the clarification for a white guy.
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly. For a white guy.
These slight differences in instrumentation in the hooks keep them fresh each time they recur. They're the same familiar hook, but with a slight twist. Another great use of instrumentation occurs at the end of each chorus, where all the instruments drop out, putting the spotlight squarely on the cowbell hook.
Hey, hey, do that brand new thing.
This cowbell hook is like a little percussive ribbon that neatly ties up the end of each chorus, and indeed the whole song on its final occurrence. Now, more often than not, songs using verse-chorus structure will have 2 verse sections, but this song has 3 verse sections. While the instrumentation in the first 2 verses is the same, the instrumentation in the 3rd verse is quite different. As I mentioned when talking about structure, this sequence beginning with the 3rd verse is all about subverting expectations, and that extends to the instrumentation. The guitar and drums drop out at the onset of this section, and in place of drums, we have 3 Latin percussion instruments, the güiro, cabasa, and congas. The only other instrument accompanying the lead vocal, aside from that percussion, is the bass, but it's only used sparingly, mainly highlighting the first beat of each bar.
Now he's getting a tattoo, yeah, he's getting ink done. He asked for a 13, but they drew a 31. Friends say he's...
In the second half of the verse, the guitar and drums build the tension with short, aggressive stabs, emphasizing the first beat of each bar.
He's trying too hard and he's not quite hip, but in his own mind.
In the final bar, the guitar chord played on the first beat rings out through the bar, and we get a guitar pick slide and walking 8th note bass part to lead us into the final A-B hook. Also notice how the Latin percussion from verse 3 is carried over into this final hook.
Mine, he's the dopest trip.
Finally, the unexpected Spanish counting is highlighted by cutting out all the instruments except for the drums while this counting takes place.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
This song is in the key of B minor, but all the chords used in the song are power chords. Power chords use only the 1st and 5th notes of a triad, so we don't get any thirds, which are the notes that give chords their major or minor character. So in a way, power chords are kind of like the Schrodinger's cat of chords. They could be either major or minor. They probably correspond to the chords in the key we're in, but we don't know for sure. Some of them could be borrowed chords from other keys. If the borrowed chord shares the same 1st and 5th as the chord in the key, then it would be impossible to know for sure which chord it was. It could actually be both at the same time. Anyway, these are the chords used in the main hook: 1, 3, 4, 5, and 7. Notice that this riff doesn't use chords 2 and 6, so we can think of this riff as being based on the pentatonic minor scale. Now here are the chorus chords. The riffs here use the same 5 chords as the hook riff, with the addition of this F power chord. If we add this F, or flattened 5th, to our pentatonic scale, we have a blues scale. So the riffs in the chorus are based on the blues scale. At the very end of the chorus, we briefly break out of the blues scale with the addition of chord 6, or G. Now you can look at power chords in riffs like you would a melody, a melody has underlying chords over which it is played or sung. In the same way, you can think of these power chords as having an underlying chord structure over which they are played. For the first 3 quarters of the chorus, that underlying chord pattern is chord 1 to chord 3 to chord 4. Etc. But this last part has a different chord progression, chord 6 to 7 to 1. Each chord moves up a step, so it feels like we're steadily moving towards our goal of chord 1. Dun 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 dun. As a side note, if we play the full chords with the thirds included, but replace that final minor chord 1 with the major chord 1 from the parallel major key, it's particularly effective. It feels like we're climbing up and out of the minor key into the major key. It feels triumphant, but that's not what we have here. We're dealing with power chords. So what that final third might be is left to our imagination. Now the final thing I want to talk about is this guitar motif in the chorus. It occurs 12 times throughout the song, and in a song packed to the brim with hooks, it's one of my favourites because of the dissonance it brings to the song. Specifically, we have B moving to F, which is a tritone, commonly referred to as the devil's interval due to how dark and dissonant it sounds. Jimi Hendrix uses it at the beginning of Purple Haze. Muse use it as the intro in Cave. Even West Side Story uses it. Maria, I just met a girl named Maria. This is followed by a minor second interval as the F moves to F sharp, which is actually the same thing that Maria does. Maria, Maria. The repetition of these 2 notes also gives it a taunting feel. It's like a mischievous little goblin taunting the listener. I think this dark little riff adds something special to the song, and probably goes unnoticed by many listeners. I want to finish by looking at how Pretty Fly for a White Guy incorporates features from several different genres to achieve its unique sound. We'll start with the most obvious, punk. Now most people would probably think of the Offspring as a punk band, or at least a punk rock or punk pop band. I'm sure many hardcore punk fans will scoff at this notion and insist that they're far too poppy and mainstream for this label. Nonetheless, there are certain key elements of their style that undoubtedly fit the punk mold, particularly the distorted power chord based guitar riffs and hard-edged vocal delivery, which is often not far off shouting. Commenting on social issues is another core element of punk music that is on display here in the lyrics. While their breakout hit Come Out and Play tackled the senselessness of gang violence in the poorer neighbourhoods of Los Angeles, here the band deliver a more light-hearted, yet no less scathing takedown of a young man from a wealthier LA neighbourhood who appropriates the cultural identity of gangster rappers whose dangerous lifestyles were the focus of Come Out and Play. This was the 90s, so along with Ice Cube, who is mentioned in the lyrics, the wannabe gangster is likely trying to fabricate an identity based on gangster rappers like Ice Cube's Collective, NWA, Tupac, Biggie Smalls, and Wu-Tang Clan. People he has zero cultural connection to. The second genre is pop. Now defining pop is quite difficult, but generally speaking I would say that anything that is accessible to a wider mainstream audience can be considered pop. Hooks are one way to make a song accessible to audiences, and this song is overflowing with hooks. We have the call and response hook.
Give it to me, baby.
The guitar riff hook. And it should be noted that this hook is continued in the verses in the bass guitar, making it the most repeated hook in the whole song. The All the Girlies Say I'm Pretty Fly line
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy.
The Spanish count-in,
Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, cinco, seis.
the cowbell fill, and the dissonant, taunting guitar motif in the chorus. Now the main call and response hook is also clearly a nod to the hooks of hip-hop music, and while this hook is super catchy, it is also laughably over the top. But this should not be mistaken for the band making fun of hip-hop music. Rather, this hook is the embodiment of our wannabe subject. It's the hip-hop hook that he would write. So if you find yourself shaking your head in disbelief at how ridiculous this hook is, that's exactly the point. Next, we have a bit of ska influence coming through in the verses with the skank guitar part. As mentioned previously, the influence of the blues is heard in the chorus guitar riffs, which are based on the blues scale. And last, but certainly not least, we have the influence of Latin music, specifically Cuban music, in the form of the cha-cha-cha song Oye Cómo Va, written by Tito Puente and brought to a wider audience by Santana's cover. The Offspring's lead singer has said that he had this song in mind when he was writing Pretty Fly for a White Guy, and if you compare the bass part in Oye Cómo Va to the main riff in Pretty Fly for a White Guy, you can see the similarity. Here's Oye Cómo Va, and here's Pretty Fly for a White Guy. As you can hear, those last three notes are pretty much identical in both rhythm and pitch. But even this rhythm is something you'll commonly find in cha-cha-cha music in the kick drum. And you'll hear the kick drum in Pretty Fly stick pretty close to this rhythm for a lot of the song, but with an additional hit thrown in. The Offspring song also makes use of the cowbell, güiro, congas, and cabasa, instruments that feature heavily in cha-cha-cha music. And finally, the Spanish count-in is another nod to the Latin musical influences. As a side note, this is not the only Offspring song that borrows elements of Oye Cómo Va. Look at how the riffs from Original Prankster are even closer to the Tito Puente song. They are literally the same notes, but the Offspring add a few extra notes to fill out the riff. Here's Oye Cómo Va, and Original Prankster. Original Prankster also features the güiro even more than Pretty Fly for a White Guy does. If we put Oye Cómo Va aside and compare Original Prankster and Pretty Fly, we can see that Original Prankster's chorus is based on the blues scale, just like the chorus riffs in Pretty Fly. Now I encourage you to visit the Offspring's official YouTube channel and listen to Pretty Fly for a White Guy again in light of everything we've covered in this video. Here are the sections again, and the times they start to help you navigate the song more easily. And if you can think of anything I've missed, or even if you just have a different perspective on anything I've said, let me know in the comments. Okay, time for today's song challenge. Today, I have two challenges for you. The first challenge is to see if you can think of any other songs that use call and response, a kind of conversational back and forth between two vocalists or two groups of vocalists. The second challenge is to see if you can think of any other songs that loop the last line, like Pretty Fly for a White Guy and John Denver's Take Me Home Country Roads. I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with. And like and subscribe if you got something out of this video.